All right, Justin Carter, I am back. We're going to talk about Chapter 4, which is Labor and Financial Markets. We touched a little bit on them in Chapter 3 when we talked about price floors and wages. This is a really short chapter. I think the whole point of this chapter in the book was just to basically get you thinking about the idea that labor is a commodity, that wages are a price for a commodity, and that you are selling your labor, and that companies have demand for that labor. So really simple concepts, but you need to start thinking about the idea that you and everyone in America and on Earth basically has a commodity that is called labor. And that there are lots of things that we can do to affect the price of that labor, the demand for that labor, which we'll talk about, and there are lots of reasons why the supply of labor might change, which we'll talk about. But just sort of get in that mindset that your labor is a product. So if we look at figure 4.2 from the chapter notes, it's a really simple supply and demand curve of labor. And again, if you look at the E point, that is the equilibrium salary. That is the salary for, it looks like these are nurses. And if you go above that point of E, you're getting too much supply. If you go below, you're getting too low of a price for your labor. There are lots of different factors that can affect labor demand. Sadly enough, because this is all online, this is usually something we would talk about. I really like to ask questions and have sort of a Socratic approach to teaching, which is really hard online. So unfortunately, we can't really talk about this stuff, but it's a fun topic to talk about. The book lists numerous different factors that can affect labor demand. Demand for output, which is obvious, if the if the supply that a factory needs to produce increases, obviously we're going to need more labor, so the demand for labor will increase, right? Education, which is what you're participating in today. You are learning economics to try to make your labor more valuable over the long term. And so education, training, degrees, specialization, things of this sort can affect the demand for labor. And the more specialized and educated you become, the lower the supply of those specializations, right? Which makes the demand for your particular skill set all the more valuable, right? So that's something you need to consider too. What does the market want out of me? It's one of the best things my father ever taught me. I would suggest before he passed was that, I was majoring in philosophy and politics, two things of which I love to my core. I read economics and politics and philosophy nearly daily, and have since I was a teenager. But my dad said, "What are you going to do? What are you going to do? How do you turn philosophy into a job if you can't get a teaching position?" And he said, "Go and find something marketable." What is marketable right now? And this was maybe 10 years ago, but what was marketable was statistics and programming, and I learned both, and it's what put me through college and graduate school, and fed my family for many years. So keep that in mind. Don't just study something that you love. Also try to find something that the market wants so that you're not unemployed when you get out of college, okay? That's the whole point of this entire ordeal. So make sure you learn something marketable, and I would suggest move toward computers, programming, statistics, and math, that sort of stuff. So because I can't really sit and work out problems with you on a board, we're going to approach this economics course much more philosophically rather than mathematically. But some of these economics courses, at least if you want to go further, are very mathematics driven. So don't be afraid of math. It's just a language. But go out there and do something marketable for yourself so that you're not stuck trying to find a job in philosophy, which I don't even know where you would begin. So anyway, back to what can affect the demand for labor. New technologies, of course. This is a really concern in the modern day. There's a lot of worry about whether robotics and artificial intelligence are going to push normal workers out of the marketplace, and whether there will be any jobs for them in the future, even if they are trained, say, by the government. This is a big concern. It's a big debate in a lot of magazines, Newsweek, The Economist, things of this sort. The New York Times, the Washington Post have run numerous articles about artificial intelligence and the future of work. So this can be a real influence on the demand for labor. One thing that I would say, in my experience of reading politics and economics and history especially, is that there have been many, many, many worries about this in the past. Many worries. From sort of the Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th century, to the advent of the computer in the 1960s, to the advent of the desktop in the 1980s, and every time it hasn't been true, and it actually has created more jobs in the long run based around that industry, like computers and programming, things of that sort. So, while you might want to be wary, I wouldn't get too concerned about it, right? We've heard this idea that robots are going to take our jobs for I don't know, 200 years or more, and it's never really panned out. You even have the whole group called the Luddites, who went around destroying farming equipment during the Industrial Revolution because they thought it was going to take their jobs. And so, just don't get overhyped on things. I really don't think it will, of course, have an effect on the market, right? Is it going to drive everyone to unemployment? Doubtful. Okay. Some other things that can affect labor demand: the number of companies that are out there. Free competition is good for labor. So the more oligopolistic or monopolistic a market is, or an industry is, the worse it is for labor, for the labor side of the market, and the better it is for the producer side of the market, right? So you're sort of touching on some of the ideas of Marx and Engels here. But generally, the more competition that there is in a particular industry, the better it is for the labor side and for purchasers, in numerous different ways, right? It helps to keep costs down. It helps to increase the likelihood of having innovations in the market. It increases the wages that labor is receiving. So there are lots and lots of different benefits of having real competition in the market. I know there was a whole lot of sort of lip service paid to this idea of competition in America and the real free market, but we have some serious problems with free markets in this country, and oligopolies and monopolies seem to be on the rise, and the extortion or the abuse of labor also seems to be on the rise in America. So it's something to be concerned about and something to watch out for. And don't think that I am in any way extolling socialism. It's not my point here. The free market is what we need. We need real competition in the market. And we're not really getting it, and it allows abuse of the system. Okay, some factors that can affect the labor supply, if we sort of move down the page a little bit. The number of workers in the system, the required education. Do you need to have a PhD or a master's or an equivalent of that sort or not? That, of course, is going to affect supply. Government policies. Is the government helping to pay for, say, nursing school? That's one way that if we're really short on nurses, which we seem to be these days, then that's one way that we can affect the supplies. The government can offer up some sort of subsidies for nursing school, or offer you a tuition rebate, say, if you graduate on time. Or, there's lots of ways to do this. Other factors that can affect the labor supply are labor unions. Labor unions are very careful about the supply so that they can manage the wages and the benefits of their other union members. There are also organizational requirements. So if you think about the American Medical Association, they have very, very stringent rules on what it takes to be a doctor or a nurse. But there are also other industries like plumbers, electricians, just basic everyday jobs where they have really strict restrictions on who can be a member, who can get a license, and who can practice that trade, so that they can reduce the competition in their own markets. That is so loud back there. What is going on? My cat is destroying paper bags, so apologies if it was kind of rumbly. Let's see. Okay, we're going to move on kind of below the figure 4.3 to the minimum wage. Minimum wage is merely a price floor that makes it illegal for an employer to pay employees less than a certain hourly wage. The minimum wage is complicated in America. The minimum wage is different in different states. The federal minimum wage, if I remember right, is $7.75. The federal minimum wage. So every state has to meet that minimum. But there are other states like Oregon, California, Washington, New York who have increased their state minimum wage, some of them even to this $15 point. A living wage is different than a minimum wage. The living wage is the idea that the minimum wage is too low, and this is sort of the left side's argument that the minimum wage and the social safety nets in America are far too minimal, and that people can't really survive on the minimum wage, which comes out to about $14,000 a year on a 40-hour-a-week salary at minimum wage. And a lot of people argue that you can't survive on $14,000 a year. Now think you have a child or two children, or you're a widow with a child, or it starts to become really difficult to just survive on a 40-hour-a-week minimum wage. And so that's something that people argue, that we need to increase the living wage. The argument is that it would actually help the economy, that the people at the bottom would have more to spend, and they would have to actually spend it because they need the products and services, and that the people at the very top don't really spend. They have a cap on how much they can spend, right? And most of it's just sitting in a bank somewhere. And so if you want economic activity, increasing the money that is spendable by the people at the bottom is actually the best way to go about it. So it's an interesting argument. Let's see. Yeah, I guess we'll discuss section 4.2, demand and supply in finance markets. The basics here, it says, in financial markets, those who supply capital through savings expect to receive a rate of return, while those who demand financial capital by receiving funds expect to pay a rate of return. So basically the idea here is interest, right? If I'm giving the bank my money to lend out, I have an expectation that they have to pay me a certain amount of interest, right? They have to pay me a fee to use my capital. The bank expects to have to do that. Now, this is a Western phenomenon. This isn't the way that finances really necessarily work, especially in the Muslim world. Muslims have what are called anti-usury laws. Usury is the idea that you're charging too much interest, right? So if you look at some of these really shady, like payday loan places, they say, we'll give you $1,000 toward your payday next Friday. You just have to pay us that $1,000 back plus 22% interest and fees and fines and and it ends up costing you like $2,200 for that $1,000 loan. And there's a lot of pushback from the government, and actually under the Obama administration, they said that these companies, these payday loan companies, are actually predatory against our U.S. military personnel, and they banned them. They banned them from any military base. They banned them from being within 30 miles of a military base, and you can no longer give a loan to a military personnel because they were abusing them. And yes, the military personnel have a responsibility to understand the terms of the loans and things like this, but the U.S. government found that these loan companies were abusing the personnel, and so they said you can't do this any longer. Unfortunately, they didn't protect Americans in general, but this is sort of the idea of usury, right? The idea that you're charging exorbitant interest rates, and that you're trying to trick people into basically just abusing them. I guess why I brought this up is because Islam, in the Quran, Islam says you cannot. It has laws against usury. And so this has been taken to mean that Muslim and Islam banks cannot charge interest. So instead of the way that the Western world works, where, say, I deposit my money in a bank, in a savings account, the bank loans it out, they roll all of these different deposits together, and then they loan it out to a business to try to create economic activity. The business pays them back with small interest, and they pay me back with some interest because I loaned them the original nut, right? Islam doesn't do this. Islam says, we're going to take a small percentage of your company, and if you fail, we fail. But if you succeed, you owe us some of the profits, right? And so it's a very different system. They do not work with interest. And so I don't necessarily know if we're going to discuss that later in the course. I may touch on it some because it's a very intriguing and interesting difference. But I don't know that it'll necessarily affect how we view sort of Western economics as we're talking about in this course. And lastly, section 4.3, the market system as an efficient mechanism for information. This is what makes the free market delightful and so very useful, is that it is this sort of silent and efficient mechanism for providing information to sellers, to buyers, to labor, to producers. In a command economy, like the former USSR, or the former North Vietnam, or the former North Korea, because they've changed a bit, so I don't necessarily know that they're a command economy anymore. Yes, they probably are. Less so than they used to be, but they are. Command economies don't have this mechanism for information dissemination. The state decides, well, this is what we're going to produce. We're assuming it's going to be this much demand. We are going to set our own price for particular products. This is a wildly inefficient way to run an economy, right? There are millions upon millions of products in an economy, and there's no way that some policy wonk is going to understand exactly what demand and supply and pricing and all of these intricate mechanisms need to be, right? And so that's the perfect thing about the market economy, is that it provides this information about, oh shit, demand is reducing. We need to reduce our costs so that we don't end up with a huge surplus. Or, wow, demand is increasing for this particular product, we need to raise our price because supply is limited, and we need to maximize the amount of profit we get out of each product we sell. This information mechanism doesn't exist in a command economy, and it's free for a market economy. That's the wonderful thing about it, is that it happens automatically. Right? And there can be problems in the system, of course. We're seeing today, yesterday, Elon Musk posted something about GameStop, and the GameStop stocks are skyrocketing overnight. But then there's new people in the market who are shorting GameStop hard, and so then their price dropped dramatically within an hour, and then it went back up, and it's just swinging wildly, right? This is where the information system or the information dissemination of the market can start to break down. There are problems in the system, but it is infinitely better than a command economy where the information feedback loop just completely collapses, right? And so I'm not saying that the free market is perfect, nor am I saying that a free market exists in any real sense anywhere on earth. There's no such thing as a purely capitalist economy, but there are benefits to the capitalist way of life. There are major detriments, which we will talk about in the future. But the information piece of it is one of the best and most efficient pieces of what makes the market economy so great and so well managed and so easy to run. So it's something to keep in mind. Okay, that's chapter 4. If you have any questions, shoot them over to me, put them online, put them in the chat on our Canvas, text message me, whatever you got to do. Thanks for sticking with me. Keep working hard. Have a great day, guys.